Welcome, art students. Welcome, art students. Today we're going to go from start to finish on the weaving project that we taught in class. I am going to go over how to warp your loom and how to do a basic weave, changing colors, and then adding a few embellishments such as the fringe at the bottom and the puffy clouds at the top. When it is all finished, I'm going to show you how to secure your edges with all your loose strings and go over how to affix the backer to the back of your finished weaving project. All right, let's get started. So for this project, you are going to need your wooden loom. And the wooden loom is going to have a top and a bottom. How we decide what is the top and what is the bottom is there are little holes here that are going to secure our warp string. So this is what I am going to call the top, and the bottom has no holes. Okay, so as far as the front and the back, the front that I am going to use has no writing. The back side is going to have the artist who created these wonderful wooden looms for our project. So this particular one is going to be the front side. In addition to having your wooden loom, you should also have a strip, which we call the shed strip. Now, typically your shed strip is a shed stick, and what it does is it lifts up your warp on your loom to be able to help feed the yarn through. But this one is going to be used also as a spacer, and we'll be weaving this in first. You should also have your wooden weaving needle, a tapestry needle, and you should have, of course, a packet of your yarn with your warp string. So let's get started. The first thing you want to pull out of your packet is your warp string. It is going to be this gray string. What you're going to want to do is find the end of it, and you are going to just tie it to the side, one of your holes, okay? There's not a specific way. We just want to tie it in a double knot so that it will not loosen up as we are warping our loom. So I'm just going to take this and double knot it and make it nice and secure. And that is it. So we just make a simple knot there. It does not have to be anything fancy, okay? I kind of want this knot to kind of be in the back side of my loom. So the first step in warping our loom is we're going to take our warp string and we're going to come around the back side. Okay, so remember, this is the front side. It has no wording on it. So we're going to bring our string from the back side and come up into that first tooth. Now your string will get in the way. Okay, so you want to just kind of make nice, large, wide swaying movements here. You're just going to have to move the string out of the way as you are warping. So we're going to keep our strings nice and tight and nice and straight. So we came up through the first opening. We're going to come down and string ours on top of our loom all the way to the bottom. We're going to go around that first tooth. We're not going behind it other than just going around it. Think about like if you're traveling around a tree and you're running around a tree, right? We're going to run around that tree. We're going to bring our warp string all the way back up. Now we're going into the next opening. We circle around that tooth and we come back down. All the while we're making it nice and tight. Okay, so you're going in this up and down, around, keeping your string nice and taut, never going behind it and actually wrapping it around the whole loom. We're just wrapping it around, going around these teeth. Okay, so you just continue onward all the way, making sure it's almost like you're stringing a guitar. Okay, so all the way down to the bottom. Now, you are going to want to end at the top, okay? So at this moment, if I went back down to the bottom, I would circle around this end. So I do not have an extra tooth to end off with down here. So my string is already at the top. So all I'm going to do is I'll hold that string in place so that if I let go, none of my warp will actually unravel. And I'm just going to come around that last tooth because I want to keep my warp string at the top so I can tie it off in that hole. Okay, so again, I just wrapped around that. Again, I hold on to that string. I'm going to cut off a good section of this because we're going to have to tie this in a knot. And we need enough string. So I'm cutting off probably a good 6 to 7 inches of actual warp string left over. All the while I'm holding on to my string on the backside so it doesn't unravel, trying to keep this nice and tight. Now, there's no easy way of just being able to tie the string off. So all I do is I just kind of, it's on the backside of my loom. I'm going to feed it into the front side of the hole. So I have this nice little loop here. Okay. I'm going to come up over the top and feed it down inside, right? So I'm just kind of crossing over just like you would if you're tying a shoe. I make it nice and tight, right? Now that's only one. If I just left it like this, it would all unravel. So I need to make another knot. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to take my string. I'm going to go down inside. It's from the back side. Then I come up around the front. I have this nice little loop here. I'm going to feed my string inside there. And I'm going to tie it a second knot. Okay, so that's number 2. I would probably do that about 3 different times. I want to make sure that this string is not going to go anywhere. I don't want it to unravel as I am pulling because I'm going to be pulling on this, this warp string as I add in my weave. So I just do this about 3-4 times just so that I have a nice little tie up here. Now, if you want to secure it even more, you can flip it around the back side. And to finish off this last knot, that string that we crossed over to go from the actual last tooth, I just feed it inside there ever so lightly. If you don't have a lot of space, you can just kind of play around with it. Okay. So now I have a loop, right? And then I'm just going to cross underneath it because I want to make sure that I have it nice and tight. And that just kind of finishes off a nice little knot. Okay. So there you have it. You warped your string. Now I'm going to cut just a little bit because I found that these tails kind of get in the way. So after I tie a nice secure knot, I'm going to cut it off so that I only have about 1 inch. And we are ready. Our loom is all set and ready to go for basic weave. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is I am going to go step by step in order to create the sunset effect that I made on this particular weaving project. Okay, so I'm starting off with the green that is inside your packet. And I am going to add in about 10 rows of the green. Okay. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to pull out our green. Okay. We're going to set it off to the side because we will be using green first. And we will be weaving this as a basic weave of an in and out, over under kind of technique. Before we do any weaving, we need to add in our shed strip. So our shed strip is going to go into our loom and we are going to weave it. This is going to be the process of how you are going to be weaving your actual yarn in as well. So with basic weave, it is going to be an over, under, over, under. So with your piece of strip here, your paper, I'm going to lay it on top of my first warp string. Okay. Lay it on top of it. I'm going to go under the second. I'm going to go over the top of the third, under the fourth. I'm going to go over, under, over, under, I'm going to go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, and my last one is going to be under. Okay, sometimes you just got to pull with it. The first couple of times that you do this, the string will be pretty tight. So that's what the shed stick is going to be there for, is to be able to give you that spacing. All right, so what we're going to do with this is this spacer is going to be pushed all the way down to the bottom of your loom in order to make this spacing so that as we do our weaving project, we don't push our yarn all the way over the top. We want to keep a nice wooden frame all the way around. So this gives us that spacer from our teeth to the top, basically to the top of our actual loom, where it's actually where we're going to have the opening. Okay, so that is inserting our shed strip. Now what we need to do is we need to measure out about 10 to 12 rows, okay? I'm going to go about 10. So how we measure is that every time we lay our yarn over the top of our loom, that is going to be 1 row because we do this over, under. So we're going to do about 10 rows back and forth, okay? So here I go from my left. Since I'm a right-hander, I work from left to right. So here I go. I take my string and my yarn, my green yarn, I lay it over the top. That is 1 row. I give myself a good 2 inches of overlap here. Okay, so that's 1 row. I come to my left side, I pinch the string. I'm holding on to the bunch of yarn on this side. I hold that. Now I got 1 row. Now I pull it back over again, and now I have 2 rows. Okay, each time my string on my right is getting longer because I keep pulling more over. So that's 2. We got 3. We have 4. We have 5. We have 6. We have 7. We have 8. We have 9. We have 10. Now you're going to actually have more than 10 rows just because you've given yourself a lot of room. So once I have 10 over on this side that I pulled over, I come to my left side and I cut my extra yarn. And I put this off to the side because I'll use this for the fringe later on. All right, so we measured off how much we're going to have of our green. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your weaving needle and you are going to push your yarn into your weaving needle. And you're going to pull that through and give yourself a good, 5-6 inch tail. You just don't want to make sure that it doesn't fall out. I am a right-hander, so I am going to work from right to left to start off with, but you will end up on your left side and then work your way back. And then on the right side, you'll work your way back. You're just going to go in a back and forth, left to right, right to left motion. Now, the key to weaving is the over under technique of every other line, right, of your warp string is going to be an over, under, over, under. And when you start a new row, you must look at what did I do previously, right? So this one, when I started off this row, my shed strip is sitting on top of my first warp string. So my second row that goes on top has to go under. It's going to be the opposite of what you started off with. Okay. So because I started off with it being on top with the shed strip, my second row is going to go under. So then it's every other one. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. And the last one is on top. All right. So how you can tell that you did this correctly is you can see that the row behind underneath is opposite of what I just did, right? So I see how this is over, under, over, under. All right. Now you gently pull that string all the way through. And don't go too fast because one, your yarn can knot up. And number two, you don't want to pull it all the way out. You want to leave yourself a good 2 to 3 inches of a tail in the backside because we're going to be tucking this in. All right. So that's row number 1. All right. So now we're going to come back and we're going to straighten out our warp strings and we're going to look at what we ended with. Now my string is sitting on top of my warp string. So when I come back through, I'm going to go up on top of the string, right? I'm working from bottom to top. So what I need to do is I need to go under. See how that is? We were over the top. Now I go under. So left to right, I'm going to do the opposite of what I just did. Over, under, making sure we get every single warp string in there. All right, when we get to the end, we gently pull that out. All the way, keep pulling, Don't go too fast to where you actually knot it up. Now, for each row that you go and you have this nice little loop on the end, what you want to make sure you're doing is that you gently just let it touch. You never want to pull so tight that it brings that warp string in. See how it starts to bend that warp string? You don't want to do that. You want to keep these nice and straight. So you make sure you pull that back out and keep that warp string as straight as you possibly can, okay? So it's going to have just touching that last string, all right? All right, so we have 2 rows here. We're going to look at where we ended off at. We are sitting on top of our warp string. So the next row is going to go underneath. And we're just going to continue this rhythmic pattern of over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way across. We pull it through. We get to the end of our actual row. We make sure we don't pull that loop tight. We have it touch, okay? And you're going to see that this type of string is actually going to make your warp strings kind of move. You just adjust it, but it just sits there, okay? Now I have 3 rows of my green, all right? So you can see that it's spaced apart. I like to space mine just because it's easier to move that popsicle stick. About after 3 rows, I'll just kind of take my fingers and use it as a comb. You start in the center and you pull this down. You comb it down to your actual shed string down here. And once you get the center, then you go to the left and then the right, and you just comb it down. You don't have to squish it hard. It doesn't have to be tight, but I just do that to go ahead and as I'm weaving, it's easier if they're spread apart and then you do the combing down. Now we repeat the process. Our last row ended with my yarn sitting on top of my warp string. So I got to go under, and I'm just going to repeat this pattern all the way across. And I'm going to gently pull it through, making sure that I do not pull tight at the end so my warp string does not bend, making adjustments as I need. It's just touching. I ended on top of my warp string, so I need to go under And I'm just going to continue this over, under, until I am finished with all of my green. I get about a couple of rows in, pull that through, make sure it's not twisted. And then I just gently have it come. I want to make sure that this warp string is staying straight. Okay. And then I comb it down, right? That's what I'm going to do. All right. I will continue this pattern back and forth, left and right until all of my green is done. So you finish up your rows and we'll come back. All righty, so I am getting to the last part of my row. You can see that I have just a little bit more of this yarn on. I think I have enough to go over one more, but actually as I'm looking at this, if I brought this back over, I would have, yeah, I should have enough. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to take this last one. I'm just kind of pulling out my, letting the tail of my yarn start to come out the end. I'm going to take this last row and I am going to put that all the way through. Since I cut this green, I'm just going to use up all of it. Now I'm going to get to the end here and I'm just going to pull this string out and I'm going to have it nicely, lightly touch. Okay. That is all of my rows. It ended up being a little bit more than 10 because we had, when we measured it, we had it on each side. It ended up being probably about 12 is what we ended up with. All right, so from here, I'm done with my green. Now I need to switch colors. How do we switch colors? Well, in my actual design, the next layer is going to be the water layer, right? It's going to be a darker blue than the lighter blue at the top here. So we have a darker blue here. We are going to, in our yarn, we're going to pull out that extra green. This is going to be for the fringe. So we'll set that off to the side. I'm going to pull out that's our cloud. The fuzzy blue is going to be for the sky. Okay. And then we are going to have the blue and white. This is going to be for the actual water, if you will. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing. I am going to, these tails are just going to be hanging here. We'll be finishing these tails up a little bit later as we are, when we are all finished actually doing our weaving project. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to measure out. I did about 6 rows of the blue. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to lay it over the top and we're going to give us our 1 row. I come to my other side, I pinch it, I bring over another row. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Again, you're going to probably end up with about 7 or 8. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to cut it off, lay the extra off to the side. I'm going to do the same routine in the same pattern as I did before. Take my blue, I'm going to feed it through my weaving stick, give myself a good 5 to 6 inches. Again, since I'm right-hander, I'm going to work on my right side and then weave to my left. You can work on either side. The key to weaving is looking at what you did on your last row. So I'm going to look at what I did on my last row. Get the camera in focused here. Okay. So I'm going to look, and my last row ended. It all ended with my yarn under. See how that yarn is under on my last row? It's under my first warp. So then what I'm going to do is lay my string or my needle on top because we're going to do the opposite. It's the exact same thing we did with our green. We're always looking at where did we end off at? What did my string do last? My string was laying under my warp string. So now I needed to go on top of my warp string. Okay, so I am going to pull this through, making sure that I leave myself a nice little tail of about 3 inches. All right, so then I look on my left side. I ended with my, the camera wants to focus underneath. All right, so I ended up with my string sitting under my warp string, right? So the next row on top is going to sit on top, and I'm going to go left to right in that same pattern. And I'm going to do that for the remainder of my blue string. As I pull it through, I'm going to make sure that I do not pull that warp tight. So I just let it sit on top of it, so it's not pulling this warp string, okay? I ended under my actual warp string, so I lay my stick on top. I go from right to left in that over, under, over, under, over, under pattern all the way across. And again, I pull my string through, making sure that it is not twisted and making sure that I don't pull that warp string tight. I just lay it there. I'll comb it down, right? You don't have to squish it hard. It just has to lay and touch down at the bottom, okay? And this is going to give you that blue and white kind of coloring. So then I look at my yarn and I'm like, I'm underneath, so I need to go on top for my next row. And I will continue this through my whole blue. All right, so you finish up your blue and we will come back. Okay, so I finished my blue and I ended up with, about, let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7. Like I said, when you do your actual measurements and you leave yourself a little bit, you probably get a row or 2 extra. So I'm getting these nice little tails hanging out here. They will get in the way as you're doing your weaving back and forth. You're just going to have to move them out of the way as you're doing it and just be patient with it. Okay, so the next row is going to be a yellow. We're going to start our sunset. Okay, so you have 2 different color yellows. Your yellows may look a little bit different. Mine is going to have this darker color and then a lighter color. You want the darker of the 2. They may come pretty close to the same, but if you hold them next to each other, you'll notice that one is a little darker than the other. So I'm going to start off with my darker, which looks almost like a yellowish orange color. All right, so on this one, it's about the same as what our green is. So I did about 10 rows for that, so I'll do the same here. So I'm going to measure across as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's about 9. Okay, so that's good. There's no real science to this as far as like exact number of rows. It's going to really be how you actually measure across. So there's about 9 on this particular bunch of string that I got in my packet. There was about 9 rows, and that'll work just fine. Okay. All right. So from here, again, we're going to do the same basic weaving pattern. I ended with my string on top, so my next row has to start underneath. So we do that over under pattern all the way across. If you notice that my strings, my warp strings, are actually staying nice and straight, even as I'm tugging and pulling on it. So you want to make sure that you do not pull too hard on the warp strings, especially at the end here. You want to make sure that there are no hourglass shaping, right? You're not pulling this so tight that it's starting to bow our actual warp string, okay? So again, you're doing the same exact thing. We're doing a basic weave left to right with the over under, leaving yourself a nice little tail. Okay, I ended with my yellow sitting on top of my warp string, so I must go underneath, and I do that over, under pattern from left to right. Again, I'm going to be pulling it string all the way through, making sure it doesn't get knotted, making sure that it's not pulling my warp string and actually bowing it. I get to the end. I make sure I do not pull tight. I just have it sit there. I don't want to start making this warp string bow. I come back around. I go left to right in the opposite direction with the opposite row. So if you ended with it under, then you got to start with it over. If you ended with it over, then you start with it under. Okay, so continue this darker yellow, and we will come back when you are finished. All right, so I finished my dark yellow. Now I'm going to go with my lighter yellow. This is going to have a little bit less of the rows there. So I'm going to count out about 6. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're repeating the same pattern as we did before, where we're measuring out our yarn. It's going to be the identical same each time that we cut and start a new yarn. I'm going to grab my yellow here, the lighter one. I will go ahead and feed it through my needle. Okay, you can start on any side of the loom. Again, the biggest thing with your actual weaving process is making sure that you take a look at where you ended. Remember, I ended this row with my yarn sitting on top of my warp string. So again, I have to go under it and do the over, under, over, under. Always look at the row that you just finished or that you just ended with, and you are going to you are going to do the opposite of what you ended. So if you are over, then you're going to go under, right? So we're going to keep doing it. Now you're going to notice that you're getting close to the top of your loom. And when we get to the actual sky blue, once we get closer to up here, we're going to have to switch over to our tapestry needle because this wooden needle is not going to be able to move back and forth. Remember to keep your warp string nice and loose. You don't want it tight. If it ends up starting to bow a little bit, you can just tug on it. It'll loosen up those yarns. That's why we leave these tails here, so that we can, 1, tie it off, but 2, so we can adjust our warp strings so that they don't get having that hourglass or bend shape. All right, so you finish up your light yellow, and when you are finished with that, come on back and we will go to our sky blue. All right, so I have finished my light yellow. So now I am going to work on my sky. I am not going to measure my sky. I'm just going to keep, since it's going to be my last color, I'm going to just keep the whole bunch on there because I'm not quite sure how much I'm going to need in order to fill this space. So I'm just going to leave all of it on here. Now we're going to start off with our sky blue on our actual weaving stick. However, as we get closer to the top of the loom, we are going to have to switch over to our tapestry needle because we are not going to have the space up here to be working. And it does get a little bit tight and it gets a little bit sticky. So we just want to make sure that we have enough room up there to be able to move. So we'll be using our tapestry needle for when we get closer to the top. Now, what we do is, again, basic weave. So I ended my last row sitting on top. So I need to go under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And I'm going to continue this with my blue until I get all the way up to the top. And we're doing the same process that we have been doing all along. This is just a basic weave, starting and stopping with new colors. This is going to be a lot of blue that I'm pulling through. But again, I don't really want to cut this last bit because I really do not know how much I am going to need. And it does not matter, again, that you start on the left or the right. It just matters that you look at your last row and wherever you are starting off at, that you make sure you do the opposite. So here again, I am sitting on top of my warp string. So my next row, I have to go underneath. And then I complete this row by doing that over, under, over, under, over, under. Again, this is just your basic weave. When I pull this through, I'm going to make sure, again, that I am not pulling too tight so that it does not bend my last warp. I'm going to let it just touch, right? And then I'm going to start here. I ended with it sitting on top. So I am going to go under, over, under. See how close I'm getting to the top. It will start to get a little bit tighter. You won't be able to maneuver and go up as far as you can. You're going to probably have to do some combing of your actual yarn a little bit earlier than what you were doing. If you were combing it after 3-4 rows, you're going to probably have to start doing it after 2. We want to make sure that we are not nice and tight on the end. Keep these warp strings as nice and tight or straight as possible. Start pulling them around and combing them. You know, that's why we leave that tail, is so that we can move these strings around and be able to make sure that our weaving is nice and straight. Okay, so finish up your blue. When I get closer to the top, I'll come back and we will go ahead and show you how to switch over to your tapestry needle. All right, so when I got to the end, I noticed that I have quite a bit of space and I ran out of my sky blue. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what can I do? I don't have enough to actually go from the top and finish it. The nice thing about weaving is you can add in your colors. So I'm looking at my balance here and I've got this much of my blue sky, right? I don't have a whole lot of this yellow, so I could add some more of this light yellow in. I don't really want to add any more of this dark because it looks like it's pretty powerful. So I will probably add a little bit more yellow, or at the very least, I can always add more in on my green. And I think that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to keep my sky kind of shallow, and then I'm going to add more green. Now, remember, we're going to be adding fringe to this. So how do we add after we've already done all of this weaving in there? So what you do is you just take your, I always take my actual tapestry needle, and then I just start pulling it and start pushing it upward, right? I start pushing all of mine and raking, instead of raking in the downward position, I'm going to start pushing it upward. And I'm not going to make this so tight. I want to make sure that my yarn is not tight, okay? And I want it to touch the top of my loom. I don't want to go up over the top here. I want to do it close to it. So what I'm going to do is, this is tight, so I'm just going to kind of comb it down to my liking. I don't want my sky so, I don't know, I kind of want it airy looking. I don't want it to be so tight that it looks almost too gray. I kind of want to keep that blue color. So if I pull these rows away from each other and kind of spread it out a little bit, then I'm going to be able to have a little bit lighter blue. Okay, so this is where you could, now that I have separated, if you wanted to add some more of that yellow, you could actually do the yellow. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it up, and I want to add more of the green. I'm going to keep my sky kind of to the minimal. You can do it how you would like to. I'm just going to kind of push all of these upward till I can get the top of my green so I can add more green, because I do have quite a bit of that green left. So I'm just moving all of my colors up. Now you did get some material. If you wanted to add some material into it, you're more than welcome to do so. Again, I'm just going to kind of keep with this, this actual sunset on the water kind of pattern. So I am not going to be adding any of that material, but that material is there too, you can use, and it's kind of got the same kind of color schemes as what we are doing in this sunset. Okay, so all I'm doing is just kind of moving these upwards. That's the nice thing about working with the weaving project. You can actually move your colors around. All right, so there you go. So now I moved it and I gave myself this nice little space. Now this is where you could start off with the green in your actual here with your weaving needle, and that is how I'm going to start. So I'm going to grab the green that I had originally, and I have some left over, that is some string here. I'm going to make sure that I have enough long enough piece that I can fill in that gap. Now remember, we are going to put some fringe in there, so I'm not going to open up the second bunch. This is going to be used for my fringe. I'm going to use the leftover that I had. All right, and I'm not even going to measure it out because it's already been cut once. I'm going to feed it in through my needle. Okay, because this is a thicker yarn, I will probably just squish up my actual weaving project to give me enough space to work. I ended on this side, so to continue, I want to make sure that I end on this side so that my weaving is going to be the same. All right, but I can start on the other side. So I'm on here, I'm looking, my last row was under, so I want to go on top, and then I'm going to do the over under. And remember, you're going to end on this end, just like what we did before when we are finished with this grass. Okay, so I'm going to pull this through. All right, again, I'm just kind of filling in where I didn't maybe measure as many rows as I possibly could. That's fine. You can just add in the colors. The biggest thing is making sure that you end off the same that you did, okay? So I am going to go left to right here. As I get closer to my water line, right, I'm going to just kind of push this down, give me enough room, because I'll spread it out after I do about, I don't know, probably about 5 rows, maybe 4 rows, or just kind of finish this green off. Again, this was the green that I had left over from my first green. There were 2 bunches or 2 rolls of green yarn in your packet. I am using the one that I had already cut. I don't want to use the other one because that will be used for my fringe. So I want to make sure that I have enough to do that fringe. Okay, so again, when we get to this point, remember we squished it, right? So you don't have to do as many rows as you think to fill this in, because we squished these together. You're going to be able to spread this yarn out on your loom and be able to fill in the gaps. Just making sure that my row that I started ended on my left side. So when I go to end, I want to make sure I end this row just to make sure that all of my weaving pattern is the same. I don't want to be adding in a row and then having it duplicate from the top to the bottom. So in between, okay? So I had ended my original green on the left side. So I am going to end this green that I'm adding in on my left side. All right, so at this point, I'm looking at this and I added in about 5 rows. And I'm looking, do I want to add in a few more rows to give it? Because I'm going to have room to be able to put my fringe. And yes, I'm going to add in a couple more rows. All I'm doing is just kind of playing with this, giving it an eyeball. So I need at least 2 more rows. Okay. As you get closer, you can just kind of scoot it upwards with your weaving stick, just so that, you know, you get room to be able to use this weaving stick. With this thick yarn, you don't want to use that tapestry needle because it would be really hard to feed that through that eyelet. So just remember not to pull so tight on the end. Make sure you do the over under pattern. And then I'm going to show you also how to adjust some of your rows that you're in. Working with a weaving project is so simple to be able to move your yarn around and to adjust it to what you need. If you pulled too tight, you can loosen it up because you have all of these wonderful tails. If you pulled too loose and you have some loose ones, you can make it tighter because again, you have some of these tails. So I'm going to end on this side. I'm pretty close to where I was, and I know I squished these in. So I'm on my left side, just like I did on my other. I'm going to take this string and I'm going to cut it off again, about 3 inches. All right. From here, I'm going to take my tapestry needle and I'm going to kind of fluff it, if you will, right? I'm going to push it back up so it's not so tight together. I don't want it so tight that I can't add my fringe in, but I don't want it too loose to where you can see the back side of when we put all of our beautiful strings. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start combing this top part down, back down to my green. Okay. And again, I'm just kind of lightly putting it there. I'm not making it tight. Okay. If you want yours tighter, you can add in a couple more rows. It's very simple to do. You just got to end on the same way. If you started with it on the right side, then you got to end with it on the other side. You just want to make sure that your every other row is accurate here. Okay. You want to keep it that same. All righty. So now, if you look, we have a finished basic weave. Okay, so this is how it looks when it's all finished, and you can pull it apart and kind of move it around. So at this moment, we are going to be adding our fringe. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do to add our fringe, we need to count how many warp strings we have. We will be using it in succession of 2s, but we're going to be bunching 2 of our warp strings together. However, we're going to overlap them so that there is not a gap. So I'm going to look here. Now I know that down here, I had my over under. I guess I could come to the top and count it. I'm going to count how many warp strings I actually have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. All right, so I have 16 warp strings. So what I want to do is to measure out my warp string. Let's get that camera back in focus here. All right, to measure out my actual fringe, not warps, I am going to take the brand new yarn. And before we measured from horizontally with our top at the top, but this time we're going to do it vertical, okay? So we want longer pieces. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to go, I'm going to make, let me move this up a little bit further so you can see what I am doing. Okay. So I'm doing the same thing that I did before where I am measuring out, okay? So what I'm going to do though is I am, instead of going left to right, I'm going to go up and down and I'm going to do about 16. So I have one, right? And I'm going to cut the top and I'm going to give myself, you know, just this time you only need about an inch, right? You only need an inch on each end. You don't need a lot. So that's one. So then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to measure it out. That's 2. Okay, I'm going to go 3. I'm going to go 4. And this doesn't have to be exact measurements, but you don't want it to get too big or too small. 5, because you'll be doing some trim. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm just measuring out 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and I had a little bit left over. If you only get about 14, that's fine. We'll stick with 14 right now. We're going to take this bunch of fringe and we're going to put it off to the side. All right. So for those of you that want to add fringe, what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at our actual weaving project. And just like we did where we separated, what we're going to do is we're going to find a spot that we want to put it. I'm going to put mine toward the bottom. I'm going to probably go up maybe about, let's see, I got 1 row, 2 rows, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm going to go at that 11 mark. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to comb out a gap here. All right. These are those final details. If you like it the way that it is, you do not have to add this fringe. You can fast forward it to the next section and then it will show you how to tie off. Okay. But we're going to add the fringe. So I got this nice little gap here in between. This is where I'm going to be adding my fringe. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move my camera as close as I possibly can. I'm going to show you how to put this on. We're going to be using 2 warp strings at a time. There is not going to be an actual knot, if you will. In this, you are going to actually, there we go. I think that's about there. All right. Hopefully my camera will come into focus. All right. So at this point, this is our gap. I am going to take one of my fringes that I cut, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the back side. Now this is going to get a little tricky. You may need to give yourself a lot more space. Again, remember you get to fan this out. So give yourself a lot of room to work, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my string. I'm going to come up from the back side, okay? Right? I'm going to go over the top side. Okay, so I have it just kind of dangling between, right? I've got this there, and it's just hanging over the top of the two. Okay. All right, I'm going to make sure that my strings on the bottom are pretty even. Right, they're pretty set and even, and they're hanging over the top of two warp strings. Okay. So then I'm going to take my tapestry needle. If you have a hook, like a crochet hook, this works better, but I'm just going to use what we have. So I'm going to grab a hold of those two strings. All right, so I dropped my tapestry needle there, so sorry about that. So I have my fringe sitting on top of two of my warp strings. I'm going to take my tapestry needle and I am going to grab one of those tails from underneath and I'm going to pull it forward. Okay. So all I did was go around that actual warp string. All right. And I'm going to do the same. This one's dangling. So I'm going to bring it through that same one. I'm going to come right in between the two. Again, if you have a crochet hook, it works better. Okay. So now I've made this kind of this knot, right? And I'm just going to pull it down. And then there's my first fringe. Okay. I'm not pulling tight because I don't want these warp strings to actually bow, but I am going to secure it by just kind of pulling it taut without making these wave. All right. So that's my first fringe. All right. So for my next fringe, all right, I'm not going to pull too tight. I'll grab my next string. All right. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to feed it up. So these are my first two, correct? We need to overlap. So my next two is going to be the one on the left of the two that I first had. And I'm going to pick this one and this one. Okay. So I just kind of move those fringes out of the way. All right. And I am going to start with my second string. I'm going to feed it up between my first and second. I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to go over to the third string. So I went between my first and second, right? I'm going to cross over. So I have two of them. I'm going to pull that down. I'm going to make that as even as I possibly can down at the bottom, right? I'm going to move it forward. Again, if you have a crochet hook, this works better. I just kind of hold it in the bottom here. I take my tapestry needle, I grab a hold of it, I pull it up in between those two. Okay. I grab my other side. Again, if you have a crochet hook, it works a lot better, but I just kind of pull it up in between. So then I have this nice little knot. Okay. See how that is wrapped around, right? And it is also wrapped around the first one I did where they're overlapping. See how they have the overlap? All right. So I'm going to do my next one, right? And I always go over the top because I went, from top to bottom. So I just move those fringes off. I add my next one. I worked, my last one was this third string, this third warp. So I come up and feed it in. I'm always overlapping, right? So if I ended up on my third string, now I got to come up on the right side of my warp string. I'm going to cross over to my fourth warp string. So I'm including 2 warp strings in each fringe. Okay. I'm going to make it as even as I possibly can in the bottom, right? I am going to take my needle and I'm going to pull it up between the third and the fourth right here. This is where it arches over the top. I'm going to pull it up underneath. Okay, so I got my fringe coming out. On my other one, I'm going to take the same thing. Okay. I'm going to pull it up. So again, I've got 3 now on here. Okay. And they are overlapped. See how that they overlap? All right. So then as you go through, you're going to have this nice little fringe hanging down. And they actually are going to be, my camera, they're actually going to be overlapping each other. Okay. So see how it's got this nice little knot? There's this last one I did overlaps the same warp string. Okay. So we'll do that one more time. All right. So I'm going to move that off to the side. I ended here on my 1, 2, 3, 4th warp string, right? Okay. So I'm going to take my fringe, one of my fringes. I am going to feed it up on the right side of my 4th warp string. I am going to arch it over to my 5th, the left side of my 5th warp string. So I'm making this nice little arch where it's including 2 of my warp strings. All right, at this point, I'm going to make them as close to even as possible underneath. All right. I am going to, it is now over the top of 2 of my warp strings, right? It's here. It came up over here. So it came up. Make sure I move that out of the way for you. Okay. So it came up. I arched it over 2 of them. This is my fringe underneath. I am going to pull that up. I'm going to take my next string and just use my fingers to kind of move and maneuver it underneath that warp string so it's easier to grab. Okay, I'm going to pull it up through the same hole. All right, and I've got a fringe. All right, so now if I pull all of these down, you'll see you'll have this nice fringe started. Okay. All right, so you're going to continue that all the way across and then come back when you are finished. All righty, now what we did is you should have your fringe all attached. Okay, so you have this nice little gap. Again, all we're going to do is we're going to comb that out and just kind of separate that. You can also go from the bottom, pull your fringe up. If it's tight down here, you can bring that up because this is all going to be covered up anyways. So if you want more, if you want your weave to be a little bit tighter up here, you could actually pull this up and leave a space because that will be covered up by your fringe too, okay? What you're going to do after you are all done and you have it in a hanging position, then you're going to come back through and you're going to trim this off the way that you would like it. Okay. We're not going to do that right now. That's going to be to your liking and how you want to do it. Right now, you're just going to kind of spread this out so that it looks even across the way. All right. And again, we do have all of these little hangies, you know, these little tails. We'll come back through and fix those in after we are done with entering in the clouds. All right, so for the clouds, what we're going to do is in your packet, you have this white fuzzy kind of wool. All right, we're going to take off a piece of it. Now, this is going to be typically when you are doing a weaving project, a lot of weavers will actually weave this in and out. That gets a little bit tricky because you're stopping and starting in the middle of your actual loom, and we don't want to do that for this. We're just basically looking at the basic weaving stitch, and then we're going to embellish it with just a few things. So we're going to treat this as if this was material and not so necessarily a woven piece, but actually like a piece of material. And we're going to kind of sew this into where we want to position our clouds. Okay. So what we're going to do is, this is a very thick piece of wool. You're just going to grab a portion of this and we're just going to tear all the way down, right? You don't need that big of one. It's wool, so it kind of comes across really nicely. All right, so now what you're going to do is we are going to need to have this put into our tapestry needle. So what I do is, the ends are pretty furry. So what I do is I just kind of trim off so it's a nice straight edge. All right, I trim off a little piece. Then I take my finger and I just kind of twist it around till it becomes this nice little thin, almost a string, right? I just twist it around a little bit here so that I can put it in my eyelet. All right. And you're going to have these little fuzzies. I just kind of pinch that down and I make it as thin as I possibly can. And then of course I'm going to feed it into my actual eyelet. Okay, and you just kind of force it in there and pull it through. All right, now you got this nice little tail that's hanging out, right? We're not going to tie it at all. It's just kind of into ours. So I'm going to look at my cloud and I'm going to think to myself, I'm going to probably have a lower cloud that kind of covers over in between the blue and the yellow area. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through the bottom, right between warp right there. You know, I'm just going to come up. I'm going to sew it just like I would an actual piece of material. All right. So I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to leave that 3-4 inches on the back. And I hold it down with my hands so I don't pull it. So now I can come over here and I'm going to go into this, just around that first warp, similar to like what we did with our fringe. Right? And I'm going to pull it in, pulling these tails out. That's going to get me my first little bit of cloud, right? So now I'm going to come up the next. See how I was on in my below the blue? I'm going to go up to the next row and I'm going to poke my needle through. Whoopsie. All right, I'm holding on to the back side. I'm going to poke it through. Again, we're doing a sewing. All right, and I'm not going to pull hard, right? All right, so now for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to skip over probably about 3 of my actual warps, okay? So I'm going to come through and I'm going to skip over about 3 of those. I'm up in the blue area, right? I'm going to come over here about 3. All right, so I am going to come over about 3. I'm going to pull that down and I'm not going to go real tight, but I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to come back again, this is all we're doing is trying to affix this. So I'm going to come back to the middle underneath. So I'm going around that same warp that I just tucked in, right? And I'm going to come back up. Again, I'm using this as a sewing, just like I would sewing instead of actually weaving. All right. I'm going to pull that back up. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to go over another two. And I'm going to make this nice fluffy cloud. Okay. All right, so now we're starting with my cloud. Now I'm going to come back way over here to this one. I got this nice little gap. I'm just going to kind of sew my cloud in. I'm not going to necessarily weave it in, right? I'm just going to kind of sew it in to where I want this cloud to be. All right. So that's how I'm going to make my cloud. All right, so then I just added a couple of lines there. I'm not going to add too many. I just did 3. I kind of sewed it in. It's not going to go anywhere because it's now wrapped around the back side here. Okay, so now I'm just taking it off. I'll take my scissors and just kind of trim just a little bit off the end. All right, and to make your cloud poofy, all right, to make it poofy, all I'm going to do, so that it goes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tapestry needle and I'm going to fluff it. Just kind of pull it and I kind of make it look furry. I puff it, okay? Spreading those fibers out. I pull it. And the more I pull it, the hairier it gets. And then I have a nice little cloud, okay? Okay. So you can add another cloud in there. You could put one up over in this area. You can add as many clouds as you want. If you want it to be even fluffier, you just kind of spread those fibers out. So they, we're kind of manipulating those fibers. If you feel like you need to add more poof to it, you can, but that's how you're going to be adding a cloud. You're just going to sew it in, all right, making sure that you don't pull it all the way through. You can add some clouds down here to make it look like it is part of your actual sunset, so it's not so dark. Now on this camera, this looks really, really orange, but in the actual lighting, it's not as orange as it looks and appears. Okay, so you can add as many clouds in there as you want. All right, so you're just sewing those in. Each time you're just going to take off a piece off from your major one that you got, and you're just going to tear a piece off from it, right? Make it a little bit smaller, right? You're going to fix the ends so that they're not so hairy. You're going to wind it up and you're going to feed it through your eyelet. Okay. And then you're going to just sew that cloud in. Okay. You're going to sew it in starting from the bottom, work over a couple and just make it the way that you want it. You know how a cloud looks, it kind of has these little puffiness. You can actually make it nice and puffy and you can make it go across your whole thing. It's really up to you. You are the artist. You can make it the way that you want, but that's how I sewed my actual cloud in. All right, so let's talk about how we're going to finish off these little tails, okay? I am going to work in this yellow area. The way we tie this off is going to be identical to each row. It doesn't matter what color, but for camera purposes, it's going to be a lot better if I show you on this orangey yellow color versus on the green, because that green kind of blends in a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to do the finishing off and tucking these in between and getting it in the back of your actual loom, because we don't want to have these tails sticking out in the front. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, I'm going to try and get this as focused in as possible. All right. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. So let's look at this one here, this piece here. I've got my tapestry needle. I'm going to look, if I were to just push this string behind, I would have an empty warp because I ended my tail underneath my warp. Okay, so I cannot just tuck this under because then when I do that, I would have a warp that is hold. There's a hole there, right? So I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do is I am going to instead wrap it around that warp. So I kind of spread this out. I'm going to take this warp, I'm going to push it back over, okay? Okay, I'm going to push it back over and I'm going to wrap it around this. Instead of just tucking it this way, I'm going to wrap it around. So like I did with my actual fringe, right? I'm going to push it down into that between those two warps, and I'm just going to pull it down inside. Okay, that's going to give you, kind of hard to do. I want to make sure that you stay in focus here. So all I'm doing is I'm wrapping it around. See how I'm wrapping it around? I'm going to wrap it around that so that I keep that warp covered, okay? So that's if your string is underneath the warp. Now let's go up to the top one here. All right, so we have these tails that are hanging. And this one is laying on top of my warp. It's finishing off right on top, right? So that's a simple one. You're just going to tuck that behind because you don't really need to wrap that around the warp because it already ends at that. All right, so you're just going to tuck that behind. Now the one just above it ended underneath my warp, right? So if I tuck that behind, I'd have this vacant warp there. So what I need to do is I need to bring it over and I need to wrap it around that last warp so that I have it covered. I want to always cover up my warps. I don't want any warps that are bare. Okay, so you can kind of pull that as tight as you had the other ones. This one is sitting right over the top, so I can just merely pull that through. Okay, and this one here is laying underneath, right? It's underneath the warp, so I need to bring it over and I need to wrap it around that last warp by pushing it over the top of that warp and bringing it back. All right. Okay. So down here, we got this blue. It's laying on top of my last warp. So all I'm going to do is pull it down in. And we'll tuck it behind. Okay. And the same with this one. It is laying on top of my actual last warp. So I will be pulling that down in. Okay, just like that. All right, so that's the one side. Now we're going to do the same on this side. All right, I'm going to look at this and I am going to say, all right, this is laying on top. So this one's kind of on top of the board. So I'm just going to tuck that down inside. Again, I'm just wrapping this around. May have to push that down in a little bit more. All right, where is that? There it is. So I'm just pulling that down inside. I don't want any warps. I look at this. This is laying on top. So I'm just going to tuck that in, right? And come underneath and I'm going to pull it through, right? This one is laying underneath my warp. Okay, so I am going to feed that in, wrap it around that warp. Okay, close that back off, right? And my final one up here at the top is laying on top. So I'm going to tuck that in behind. Just like that, okay? So this is where you can kind of just fluff it out a little bit. All right. So now we have all of these pieces and all of the pieces are in behind. We have our fringe laying off the top. Oh, I got this one piece down here. This one down at the bottom here is laying underneath. So I need to wrap it around and I need to pull it behind. We want to make sure all of, not the fringe, we want our fringe in the front, right? But we want all of our loose ends to be in the back and not in the front. All right. So the final stage is just to add your back. All right. You're going to be able to, at this moment, you can take off your shed strip. Okay. That gives you that little space here. All right. You can maneuver your green grass to kind of cover all of that up. All right, you're just going to kind of space it out. Give yourself a nice little grassy knoll there. Okay. All right, and at this moment, what you're going to do is you're going to flip it over and we're going to affix. If you are satisfied and you are finished with sewing in, you've added in as many rows as you want, you're just going to come through and you're going to tuck these all in. Okay. All right, keeping the fringe out, but tucking all of these other pieces in. You can lay them nice and neat so that they stay within the colors. So you're not actually doing, now don't do this part until you are finished with all of your rows, but this is the very last step. When you are satisfied with sewing in as many clouds as you want, and you are satisfied that you have added as many rows as you want of each of the color, then what you're going to do is you're just going to tuck them all in nice and neat. And we are going to affix our backing. Now your backing can be anything. You can tape it if you would like. You can glue it if you want. All right. It's going to fit nice and neat over the top of your whole back like this. Okay. So what we are going to do, what I have is I have this roller glue, but you can use any kind of glue. You don't want to use a whole lot of that Elmer's glue unless you smear it onto your actual paper. I suggest doing that anyway, just because you don't want to put any glue that goes onto your actual paper. This is a nice little Elmer's glue that just kind of rolls on. So it's just like your glue stick. This is a little bit tackier than the glue stick. You can use any kind of glue. If you wanted to use hot glue and have your mom tack it in that way, if you wanted to use tape, you can do so. But I'm just going to go all the way around the edge with the tape. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to lay it on my back here. And I'm just going to affix my back so that it is nicely taped down, right? I'm going to try and smooth it out. So now you can't see any of those. So now you can flip it back over and you have a finished piece. All right. There we go. Oh, mine keeps getting stuck on my wire. Sorry about that. All right. Now for finishing it off, you're going to trim your ends, your fringes. Mine are a little bit longer, so you can kind of come to an angle if you like. You can come straight across. You're just going to trim off those pieces however you want, whatever length you want. If you like it all zigzaggy, you're more than welcome to do so. You do not have to trim it if you don't want, but if you want it to have more of a nice clean edge here, you can go ahead and cut those off. Okay. And that is our finished weaving project. You can put some string at the top to hang it so that you'll be able to hang it up on a wall. But I hope you enjoyed this project. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me and let me know. But that is how you do a basic weave with adding a few embellishments of a cloud and some fringe. See you next time in art class. Bye.